Imagine walking through the streets of Florence at dusk. The cobblestones echo beneath your steps, and above you rise the towering palaces that once belonged to one of the most powerful families in Europe. Their name still lingers like a whisper in the air: the Medici. At first glance, they were simply bankers, patrons of art, and leaders who filled the city with beauty. But behind the golden glow of Renaissance Florence was a hidden world, a labyrinth of secrets, codes, and carefully veiled ambitions. The Medici were not only protectors of culture, they were master strategists who knew how to shape reality itself without ever appearing to do so openly. What makes their story so compelling is not just what they built, but what they concealed. Every fresco, every sculpture, every architectural flourish might carry a meaning beyond its surface. A painting that dazzled citizens in a church may have been a coded message to allies. A corridor hidden inside a palace may have been an escape route during times of betrayal. A letter written in beautiful script might hold a cipher that changed the fate of kingdoms. The Medici understood that real power often rests not in the open but in shadows, where symbols and secrets do the work of armies. This is not just history, it is a mystery still unfolding today. Modern technology is uncovering messages that had been hidden for centuries. Imaging techniques reveal sketches beneath paintings, archives reveal letters once thought lost, and scholars decode phrases that read like riddles from another age. With each discovery, our understanding of the Renaissance shifts. What we thought was simply an age of beauty and rebirth is also revealed as an age of intrigue, where every brushstroke, every stone, and every whispered word could carry hidden weight. And at the center of it all, the Medici family orchestrated a performance of power so subtle and so enduring that we still feel its echoes now. They were neither saints nor villains, but something far more fascinating. A dynasty that blended ambition with generosity, secrecy with brilliance, ruthlessness with vision. Their rise was not inevitable, but it was carefully constructed, layer by layer, until Florence itself became their stage. In exploring their legacy, we are not only uncovering the story of a single family. We are asking deeper questions about how power works, how appearances can mislead, and how history itself is shaped as much by what is hidden as by what is revealed. The Medici remind us that every age has its shadows, and that by learning to see them, we better understand our own time. Welcome to our channel Words of Time, and in this video we are going to take you deep into the hidden world of the Medici. Their secrets, their codes, their intrigues, and the mysteries that still surround them centuries later. The story of the Medici family is one of the most fascinating in European history. It is not simply a story of wealth or banking, but of how money, influence, and subtle manipulation can shape entire societies. The Medici are remembered as patrons of the Renaissance, defenders of Florence, and as a dynasty that produced popes and queens. Yet beneath these celebrated roles was a hidden hand, a way of using resources, relationships, and appearances to guide events without always seeming to do so openly. Their story illustrates how a family that began as merchants could build an empire of influence that went far beyond money and trade. The Medici rose in Florence during the 14th century, when the city was one of the most vibrant and competitive centers in Europe. Florence was full of rival families, powerful guilds, and shifting alliances. Success required more than wealth. It required the ability to maintain trust, form strategic connections, and sometimes hide one's true motives. In such a competitive environment, the Medici learned to operate in ways that were not always visible to outsiders. They cultivated an image of service to the city while quietly ensuring that power remained in their hands. At the center of their strategy was banking. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici laid the foundation for the family's rise. He built a banking network that stretched beyond Florence into Rome, London, and other European cities. The Medici Bank handled papal finances and served kings and merchants alike. Banking gave the family a vast reach, but it also exposed them to risk. Money lending could be controversial, especially when tied to the church's restrictions on usury. To protect their reputation, the Medici presented themselves not as greedy financiers, but as servants of Florence and defenders of the common good. Cosimo de' Medici, often called Cosimo the Elder, perfected this balancing act. He was among the wealthiest men in Europe, yet he avoided the appearance of being a tyrant. He lived with relative modesty, rarely flaunting his riches in ways that could provoke envy. Instead, he used his fortune to fund public projects that improved Florence's standing. He financed churches, libraries, and works of art that still draw admiration today. These projects were not only gifts to the city, but tools of influence. By funding the construction of San Lorenzo or supporting artists like Donatello, Cosimo was shaping the culture of Florence. People saw him as a benefactor, not simply as a banker, and this reputation allowed him to guide politics without appearing to dominate them outright. This is what historians sometimes call an open secret of power. Everyone knew the Medici had wealth. Everyone saw their generosity. Yet not everyone understood how much control this generosity gave them. By funding public works, they won loyalty and gratitude. Citizens felt indebted to them, sometimes in ways that were deeper than financial obligations. Politicians who benefited from Medici support often advanced their interests. Artists who received Medici patronage promoted ideas that enhanced the family's prestige. Even the architecture of Florence began to reflect Medici influence. Their money reshaped the very landscape, so that every street and square reminded people of their presence. Behind this generosity was careful strategy. The Medici used patronage not only to display their name, but also to build networks of obligation. They placed allies in government positions, sponsored young men in their education, and secured appointments in the church. They understood that real power did not always come from official titles, but from the ability to influence decisions behind the scenes. By shaping who held office, who gained recognition, and who owed favors, they created a web of control that extended far beyond their bank accounts. Yet for all their influence, the Medici never wanted to appear as monarchs or overt rulers, at least in the early stages. Florence prided itself on being a republic, where no single person openly claimed absolute authority. For the Medici, the challenge was to guide the republic while hiding their dominance. They did so by allowing others to serve as formal leaders while ensuring that those leaders were dependent on them. Cosimo, for instance, rarely held high office for long, yet he controlled who did. His presence in Florence was so vital that when he was exiled by political enemies, the city quickly realized how much it relied on him. Within a year, he was recalled, and his opponents were banished. This episode revealed the paradox of Medici power. They were not kings, but Florence could not function without them. The family's reliance on subtlety was born out of necessity. They were merchants, not nobles by birth. Old aristocratic families often looked down on them and questioned their legitimacy. To survive and thrive, the Medici had to avoid appearing as upstarts who sought to overthrow tradition. They clothed their ambitions in the language of service, religion, and culture. They presented themselves as protectors of Florence's independence against external threats. At the same time, they carefully suppressed rivals, sometimes through exile, sometimes through economic pressure, and sometimes through alliances that cut competitors off from resources. Another important tool in their hidden hand of power was information. The Medici Bank's wide network gave them access to news from across Europe. They knew about wars, trade routes, and political changes before many others did. This information allowed them to make strategic choices, whether in lending money, supporting allies, or backing artistic projects that would strengthen their image. In an age when communication was slow, controlling information was as valuable as controlling gold. As time went on, later generations of the Medici expanded these strategies. Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, combined political skill with artistic patronage on a grand scale. Under his leadership, Florence became a beacon of the Renaissance, with artists like Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, and Michelangelo finding support through Medici funds. Yet Lorenzo also faced constant threats, from rival families to conspiracies supported by foreign powers. The infamous Puzzi conspiracy, in which his brother Giuliano was murdered during Mass, was a reminder of how fragile this system could be. Still, Lorenzo survived and turned the event to his advantage, presenting himself as a defender of Florence against treachery. Once again, the Medici demonstrated how public opinion could be managed through image, memory, and carefully crafted narratives. The Medici legacy shows that their power was never based only on wealth. Money was a means, but influence required something more. It required the ability to understand how people thought, how cities functioned, and how symbols shaped society. By funding art and architecture, they embedded themselves into the very identity of Florence. By supporting the church, they gained spiritual legitimacy. By backing education, they shaped future generations of leaders. Each action reinforced the others, creating a cycle of influence that was difficult to break. Still, their need to conceal their ambitions never disappeared. Unlike monarchies, where power was clear, the Medici had to operate in shadows and in half-light, always balancing generosity with control. They needed Florence to believe in its republican traditions, even as they hollowed those traditions from within. Their story reminds us that power often works best when it is not seen directly, when it operates under the cover of accepted forms and familiar structures. In the centuries that followed, the Medici would rise even further, producing popes such as Leo X and Clement VII, and queens such as Catherine de' Medici in France. These later successes were built on the groundwork laid in the early years, when the family learned to turn wealth into influence and influence into lasting control. Without the careful strategies of Cosimo and Lorenzo, without the ability to shape opinion through patronage in public works, the Medici might have remained successful bankers but little more. Instead, they became a dynasty that defined an age. The lessons from their rise still resonate. They show that true power is rarely about force alone. It often lies in perception, in trust, and in the careful use of resources to guide others without appearing to command them outright. The Medici mastered this art, creating a legacy that continues to shape how we understand politics, culture, and influence. The Medici legacy is not only written in banking records or political documents, but also hidden in the language of art, architecture, and private communication. For them, influence was not simply a matter of money or alliances, but also of shaping meaning. In an age when most citizens could not read, symbols became the most powerful medium. A family like the Medici, who needed to preserve power without openly declaring it, relied on images, signs, and coded messages that could speak louder than decrees. Paintings, sculptures, and even the very layout of their palaces served as part of their invisible script, one that helped them maintain their place in history. Renaissance Florence was not only a city of commerce and politics, but also a city of images. Churches were filled with frescoes, public squares held statues, and private palaces displayed artworks commissioned by the wealthy. These works were never just decoration. They carried meaning, often layered in ways that spoke differently to different viewers. For ordinary citizens, a painting of a biblical story might simply be devotional, a reminder of faith. For those who knew how to read the signs, the same painting could signal political alliances, family ambitions, or warnings to rivals. The Medici understood this better than most. They invested heavily in art not only to beautify Florence, but to encode their presence within the very culture of the city. Consider the work of artists like Sandro Botticelli. On the surface, his paintings of mythological scenes seemed like celebrations of classical beauty. Yet for those close to the Medici, they carried messages about power, lineage, and destiny. The Birth of Venus, for instance, could be read not only as a revival of ancient myth, but also as an allegory of Florence itself, reborn under Medici guidance. Mars and Venus, another of Botticelli's works, has been interpreted as a reflection of political harmony after strife, with Florence, under Medici rule, taming conflict and embodying balance. Such works could be admired by the public for their beauty, while quietly reinforcing the image of the Medici as guardians of order and enlightenment. Even religious commissions were not free from coded messages. When Cosimo the Elder financed the rebuilding of San Lorenzo, he was doing more than supporting the church. The design and decoration of the church placed the Medici in a sacred narrative, tying their family to the story of Florence's salvation. Chapels bore their emblems, tombs honored their ancestors, and the very geometry of the architecture aligned with ideals of harmony and balance that reflected their vision of society. A casual visitor might see a holy space for worship. A more attentive observer would understand it as a carefully constructed stage where the Medici presented themselves as Florence's chosen stewards. Symbols extended beyond paintings and churches into the very palaces the family inhabited. Medici residences were not only homes, but instruments of influence. Their layout, decoration, and hidden features all contributed to the family's ability to maintain power. The Palazzo Medici Riccardi, designed in the mid-15th century, is a striking example. From the outside, its rusticated stone walls projected solidity and strength, yet not ostentation. It was meant to convey authority without provoking envy. Inside, however, the palace contained spaces of both splendor and secrecy. Courtyards adorned with classical motifs linked the family to ancient Rome, suggesting legitimacy and grandeur. Hidden chambers allowed private conversations, while certain corridors connected directly to nearby churches, ensuring discretion in times of political tension. The use of secret passages was not unique to the Medici, but they mastered it as part of their system of quiet control. In the later Palazzo Vecchio, which became their seat of power, corridors connected rooms in ways that allowed rulers to observe proceedings without being seen, or to move unseen between council chambers and private apartments. There are stories of concealed staircases and hidden doors, crafted not only for protection but also for psychological advantage. To know that you could move unseen within your own city was to hold an advantage over every rival. To create a space where symbols were layered into walls, ceilings, and floor plans was to ensure that architecture itself became a language of authority. One of the most intriguing aspects of Medici influence lies in the possibility of hidden archives and encrypted communication. Banking families had always needed discretion, for revealing too much about their accounts could invite both envy and danger. The Medici developed careful methods of record-keeping, and while much has survived, scholars suspect that some of their most important documents remain missing. Letters written in code, financial records concealed under layers of symbols, and correspondences with foreign courts may still lie unread in private collections or buried in archives. These lost texts could reveal not only details of transactions, but the true extent of their hidden hand in European affairs. We know that secret writing was part of Renaissance culture. Diplomats used ciphers, merchants disguised sensitive information, and popes themselves relied on codes to secure their communications. It would have been natural for the Medici, whose interests stretched from Florence to Rome and from England to the courts of France, to use similar methods. Imagine letters between Lorenzo the Magnificent and his allies, containing not only discussions of art and philosophy, but instructions for managing conspiracies, loans, and alliances. Some of these documents may never have been deciphered, and others may have been deliberately destroyed to protect the family's image. The idea that archives could still contain unknown secrets adds another layer to the Medici legend, reminding us that their story is not yet fully told. The language of symbols and shadows was powerful precisely because it operated on multiple levels. For the ordinary Florentine, the Medici were benefactors who built churches, sponsored festivals, and supported the arts. For the educated elite, they were guardians of learning who financed scholars and preserved ancient manuscripts. For their closest allies, they were political strategists whose gifts and promises carried obligations that could last generations. And for their rivals, the symbols were warnings, reminders that the Medici were always watching, always present, always able to act even when unseen. This multilayered communication was not simply a product of cleverness, but a necessity born from their unique position. As merchants rising in a society dominated by old nobility, they could never simply declare themselves rulers. As bankers dealing with the church, they had to appear pious while managing money in ways that sometimes skirted official doctrine. As leaders in a republic, they had to preserve the illusion of freedom while ensuring their dominance. Symbols, art, architecture, and secrecy gave them the tools to achieve this balance. They could speak loudly without words, command respect without overt threats, and leave legacies that endured beyond their lifetimes. The deeper one looks, the clearer it becomes that the Medici understood power as a performance. Every chapel, every painting, every hidden staircase, and every coded letter was part of a grand stage on which they played their role. Florence itself became their theater, a city whose identity was reshaped to reflect their presence. When citizens walked past churches they had funded, admired statues they had commissioned, or lived under laws guided by their allies, they were participating in a world subtly orchestrated by the family. The genius of the Medici was to make this orchestration feel natural, inevitable, even invisible. Their story invites us to think about how influence works in any age. We often look for power in official titles or public declarations, but the Medici remind us that the real currents of history often flow beneath the surface. Symbols can be as persuasive as speeches. Architecture can be as decisive as armies. A letter written in code can change the fate of nations. By mastering these arts, the Medici secured their place not only in the politics of their time, but in the imagination of centuries to come. Even now, as historians continue to uncover details of their lives, we sense that there is more hidden than revealed. Perhaps in a sealed chest in some forgotten villa lies a set of letters explaining how a conspiracy was truly arranged, or how a pope was persuaded to grant favors, or how a work of art carried a meaning known only to the family. The allure of the Medici lies partly in this mystery, in the feeling that behind the visible world of Florence's golden age was a shadow network, carefully maintained, always half-hidden, always beyond full reach. The Medici understood something that remains true, that lasting power comes not from force alone, but from the ability to shape how others see the world. By embedding themselves in the culture, by speaking through symbols, by building spaces that embodied their values, and by guarding secrets that preserved their advantage, they built a dynasty that seemed to rise naturally from the fabric of Florence. In truth, it was anything but natural. It was the product of calculation, concealment, and an unbroken attention to the delicate balance between appearance and reality. Their legacy endures not only in the museums of Florence or the writings of scholars, but in the way we continue to search for the hidden meanings behind art and politics. Every time a visitor to Florence admires the frescoes of a Medici chapel or walks through the halls of the Palazzo Vecchio, they are moving through a world shaped by this hidden hand of power. The Medici may be gone, but the shadows they cast remain, reminders that behind every symbol may lie a secret, and behind every public gesture may be a private design. The fascination with the Medici comes not only from their visible achievements in art, banking, and politics, but also from what operated in shadows. Florence was a place where information traveled quickly through gossip, letters, and merchants' routes, but it was also a place where secrets could determine life or death. The Medici, aware of how fragile their position could be, developed methods of intelligence gathering that were as refined as their banking operations. In many ways, they anticipated practices that modern states would later formalize into organized espionage. The family's intelligence network was not a separate institution, but an extension of their banking empire. Branches of the Medici Bank stretched across Europe, with agents in cities such as Rome, Bruges, London, and Lyon. Each branch was primarily a financial hub, yet it also became a listening post. Letters sent between bankers were often filled with more than account balances. They included reports on local politics, rumors of alliances, and the mood of rulers. For the Medici, money and information were inseparable. A loan to a king was not just an investment, but a chance to gather intelligence about his court. A papal account was not simply a ledger, but a window into Vatican politics. Cosimo the Elder understood the value of this hidden flow of knowledge. He cultivated contacts not only among merchants but among diplomats, clerics, and scholars. When Florence faced external threats or internal conspiracies, he often seemed prepared before events unfolded. Rivals accused him of sorcery or uncanny foresight, but the truth was more practical. He had woven a web of informants who reported loyally, knowing that Cosimo's protection was as valuable as his gold. This early intelligence structure allowed him to survive exiles, return stronger, and dismantle his enemies with minimal open violence. Under Lorenzo the Magnificent, this network became even more crucial. Lorenzo faced a more dangerous world, where rival families like the Puzzi conspired with external forces such as the papacy and the Kingdom of Naples to undermine him. The infamous Puzzi conspiracy of the year 1478 was not only an assassination attempt, but a test of the Medici's ability to read and respond to danger. Giuliano de' Medici was murdered in the cathedral, yet Lorenzo escaped with his life. That survival was due in part to chance, but also to the loyalty of allies who had been cultivated through years of careful patronage and intelligence work. After the conspiracy, Lorenzo tightened his control, ensuring that he was always informed of threats before they became lethal. Florence itself was a city of whispers, and the Medici excelled at navigating this atmosphere. They employed messengers, scribes, and even artists as channels of information. Some of these agents were tasked with monitoring rival families, others with reporting on guild politics, and still others with keeping track of the shifting moods of the populace. Festivals, sermons, and public debates all carried hints of political undercurrents. The Medici watched them closely, adjusting their strategies as needed. Clandestine tactics were not limited to observation. Poison, betrayal, and manipulation were part of the political landscape of Renaissance Italy. While legends sometimes exaggerate the Medici's role in such acts, there is no doubt that they participated in the same ruthless games as their rivals. In courts where daggers and chalices could decide succession, survival often depended on striking first or ensuring that danger never reached one's table. There were rumors that enemies of the Medici died under suspicious circumstances, and while proof is often elusive, the pattern of convenient deaths suggests that the family was willing to eliminate threats discreetly. Papal influence added another layer to this intrigue. The Medici understood that the Vatican was both a spiritual authority and a political fortress. By placing their sons and relatives in church positions, They not only secured wealth, but also gained access to the most sensitive negotiations in Europe. When Giovanni de' Medici became Pope Leo X, the family's hidden power reached extraordinary heights. The papacy itself became an extension of their network, allowing them to shape decisions that affected kingdoms far beyond Florence. In Rome, whispers of simony, secret deals, and clandestine meetings followed the Medici Pope, reflecting how deeply politics and faith had intertwined. What is striking is how the Medici cloaked these maneuvers in the language of humanism and intellectual pursuit. Humanism was not only a cultural movement, but also a political instrument. By gathering scholars, poets, and philosophers into their circle, the Medici created a community where ideas flowed freely. But alongside discussions of Plato and Aristotle, these gatherings often served as opportunities to exchange information. A visiting scholar from another court might bring news disguised as intellectual commentary. A philosopher supported by Medici patronage might repay his benefactors with insights about foreign politics. Knowledge itself became a form of currency, traded with the same care as gold coins. Lorenzo in particular mastered this blend of culture and espionage. His patronage of writers and thinkers created an aura of refinement that impressed foreign rulers, yet beneath it was a pragmatic strategy. He knew that scholars could travel where soldiers could not, carrying messages under the guise of academic study. A manuscript might contain not only translations of ancient texts, but coded notes about negotiations in Milan or Venice. A philosophical debate might conceal discussions about alliances or potential conspiracies. Humanism gave the Medici both prestige and plausible cover for their intelligence work. This use of intellectual life as a tool of control extended into education. By financing schools and academies, the Medici were shaping the minds of future leaders, instilling loyalty and ensuring that their values spread into the ruling class. Students trained under Medici patronage often became officials, diplomats, or clerics who carried both learning and obligation into their careers. Through education, the Medici could monitor emerging talent, recruit allies, and quietly neutralize potential rivals by binding them into networks of gratitude. The great game of espionage was not limited to Florence. Across Renaissance Italy, other families and city-states engaged in similar tactics, but the Medici excelled by combining all elements, finance, art, humanism, and intrigue, into a single system. Their bank gave them reach, their art gave them prestige, their scholars gave them cover, and their spies gave them foresight. When woven together, these threads formed a web of influence that few could rival. Yet even this system was not invulnerable. Later generations of the Medici sometimes faltered in maintaining the delicate balance. Corruption, extravagance, and complacency weakened their grip, and enemies occasionally exploited gaps in their network. Still, the fact that the family endured for centuries shows how effective their methods were. They were never only bankers or only rulers. They were masters of shadows, able to see and shape events from behind the scenes. The story of their espionage and intrigue deepens our understanding of how they maintained their hidden hand of power. It was not only in the beauty of Botticelli's paintings, the grandeur of Brunelleschi's architecture, or the whispers of secret corridors. It was in the careful gathering of information, the willingness to act in secrecy, and the ability to dress ruthlessness in the garments of culture. They made Florence a stage where humanism and politics merged, where art and assassination could exist side by side, and where a family of merchants could play the role of kings without wearing crowns. What remains most compelling is the sense that we still do not know everything. Lost letters, coded manuscripts, and secret archives may yet reveal details of their network. Perhaps hidden among forgotten papers are accounts of agents who infiltrated rival courts, instructions for poisons mixed into wine, or philosophical texts that double as encrypted reports. The Medici lived in a world where survival depended on guarding secrets, and they left behind enough traces to suggest that their mastery of espionage was as developed as their mastery of banking and art. When we look back at the Renaissance, we often celebrate its beauty, its learning, and its creativity. Yet behind that brilliance was a world of shadows, where families like the Medici maneuvered with care, blending generosity with manipulation, wisdom with calculation, and faith with ambition. Theirs was a theater of power in which every symbol, every secret passage, every whispered rumor, and every coded letter played a role. The Medici remind us that history is never only what is seen in daylight. Much of it is written in the hidden language of power, a language they spoke fluently, leaving a legacy that continues to intrigue, inspire, and unsettle. The picture of the Medici as masters of secrets and shadows would not be complete without considering the consequences of this concealment. Every act of hidden influence, every coded letter, every whispered alliance, and every subtle symbol carried with it a price. To speak about the Medici as if they were only brilliant patrons of art or far-sighted builders of Florence is to miss the other half of their legacy. The veiled strategies that gave them power also placed them in constant danger, and in some ways set the course not only of their own family's fate, but of Europe as a whole. What is most striking about the Medici story is how different our understanding of the Renaissance might be if all their secrets were known. We often celebrate the age as a period of rebirth, of beauty, of rediscovery of classical wisdom. Yet the Renaissance was also an age of ruthless competition, manipulation, and intrigue, and the Medici were at the center of it. Imagine if the encrypted archives, the hidden corridors, or the symbolic codes in art were fully unlocked. We might discover that works of beauty we now admire were originally weapons in a political struggle. A statue might not only have been a tribute to antiquity, but a warning to rivals. A fresco might not only illustrate faith, but embed a message to allies about loyalty and obedience. Our view of the Renaissance would shift from a golden dawn to something more complicated, a world where culture and deception walked hand in hand. This reconsideration leads to the deeper question of the Medici legacy. Were they truly benevolent patrons who lifted Florence into glory, or were they ruthless power brokers who cloaked ambition in generosity? The answer, as with so many figures in history, is both. Cosimo and Lorenzo did fund magnificent works that continue to inspire humanity. They preserved manuscripts, supported artists, and helped shape ideas that defined Western thought. Yet these acts were not pure gifts. They were investments, strategies to strengthen their grip on society. Every coin spent on a chapel or painting returned to them in the form of loyalty, reputation, or influence. To the citizens who benefited from public works, they seemed like guardians of Florence. To rivals, they were skilled manipulators who destroyed opposition with velvet gloves that hid iron fists. The duality of their legacy is perhaps what makes them so fascinating. Their power was both visible and invisible, both celebrated and feared. To call them saints of culture would ignore the blood that sometimes stained their hands. To call them mere tyrants would ignore the genuine flourishing of art and thought they encouraged. They lived in contradictions, and their concealments allowed them to maintain those contradictions without collapsing under them. In a way, their true genius was not only in banking or politics, but in their ability to convince different audiences to see them in entirely different lights at the same time. But concealment carries risks. When a family builds its identity on secrecy, it must always guard against exposure. The Medici relied on networks of spies, coded messages, and silent obligations. When these worked, they protected the family. But when cracks appeared, the consequences were severe. The Puzzi conspiracy showed how dangerous it was to underestimate rivals who struck boldly in public. Later, as the family expanded its reach into the papacy and European courts, enemies became more numerous and more sophisticated. What had once been a carefully controlled republic became a stage for international conflict, with the Medici caught in the middle. The price of secrecy also lay in perception. For generations, many Florentines resented the family's dominance but lacked the proof or the strength to oppose them. Yet whispers of manipulation spread, and trust was never complete. Even when the Medici presented themselves as servants of the city, suspicions lingered. A republic prided on freedom could not fully embrace rulers who seemed to operate in hidden ways. This tension haunted the Medici across centuries, shaping their rise and fall. In the long run, their concealments may have contributed to their decline. The very strategies that secured their dominance bred a culture of distrust. Later members of the family, less skilled than Cosimo or Lorenzo, could not maintain the delicate balance of appearance and reality. The masks slipped, the manipulations became too obvious, and enemies seized their chance. When foreign armies marched into Italy, Florence's illusions of independence collapsed, and the Medici found themselves bargaining desperately to maintain fragments of control. The secrecy that once empowered them now made their rule seem less legitimate, easier to discredit, easier to replace. The impact of their hidden actions extended beyond Florence. Europe itself was shaped by the Medici's mixture of brilliance and duplicity. Their banking practices influenced the rise of modern finance. Their control of the papacy altered the course of religion, especially during the tumultuous years that saw the Reformation. Their alliances and betrayals shifted the balance between kingdoms, contributing to wars that redrew borders. If their archives were fully known, we might trace lines of cause and effect that reveal the Medici not simply as participants, but as prime movers of events that changed the continent. The price of secrecy, then, was not only paid by the family, but by Europe as a whole. A hidden hand guided politics, art, and faith, leaving consequences that could not always be foreseen. Some of those consequences were glorious: the flowering of Michelangelo's genius, the preservation of classical learning, the beauty of Florentine churches. Others were tragic: the corruption of the church, the violence of conspiracies, the decline of Florence's independence. The same secrecy that protected the Medici also created instability, as rivals, nations, and ordinary citizens struggled to respond to powers they could not fully see. Perhaps the most haunting consequence is that we may never know the full truth. Concealment by its nature erases evidence, hides motives, and leaves shadows where light cannot reach. The Medici controlled not only events but the memory of events. They commissioned histories, guided chronicles, and ensured that much of what we read today was filtered through their influence. We celebrate their art because it survived, but how many works were silenced, how many voices erased, how many stories suppressed? Their legacy is therefore both what is present and what is absent. What we see in Florence today is both a monument to their greatness and a mask covering what we cannot see. In this light, the Medici story becomes a mirror for power itself. Every age has its hidden hands, its secrets, its concealed maneuvers. The Renaissance, often celebrated as a triumph of openness and enlightenment, was also a theater of secrecy. The Medici remind us that culture and concealment are not opposites but partners. Beauty can hide ambition, generosity can mask control, and symbols can carry messages as sharp as daggers. The family's genius lay in weaving these strands together, but the cost was a fragile legacy, one that continues to invite debate and reinterpretation. If future discoveries bring new documents or reveal new codes in the art and architecture of Florence, our understanding of the Renaissance could change once again. We may one day see the Medici less as patrons and more as master strategists who used beauty as a weapon, secrecy as a shield, and humanism as a disguise. Or we may find evidence that complicates this view, showing that they believed sincerely in the ideals they promoted. Either way, the act of concealment ensures that our perception of them will never be final, always open to revision, always half-hidden. The consequences of their concealment endure even in modern times. We visit Florence and marvel at its treasures, rarely thinking of the coded meanings that may lie within them. We speak of the Renaissance as a rebirth of truth, rarely recalling the shadows that made it possible. We praise the Medici for their generosity, rarely asking what they demanded in return. The family succeeded in shaping not only their own age, but the memory of their age. That is the ultimate hidden hand of power, not only to rule in life, but to determine how history itself will be written. The Medici story is one of paradox. Their concealments gave them strength, but also fragility. Their patronage gave them glory, but also suspicion. Their secrecy shaped both their triumphs and their downfall. They remind us that power without openness carries within it the seeds of collapse. And yet, without their hidden hand, the Renaissance itself might look very different, perhaps less brilliant, perhaps less enduring. Europe paid a price for their secrecy, but it also inherited a legacy of art and culture that continues to inspire. What remains is the fascination of a family who lived in shadows, yet left monuments that stand in sunlight. To study the Medici is to study not only wealth, politics, and art, but the very nature of power. How it hides, how it reveals, how it sustains itself, and how it consumes itself. Their story is a reminder that history is never just what is recorded, but also what is concealed, and that the most influential forces may be those that operate unseen, leaving behind only traces for future generations to decipher. Even as centuries have passed since the height of the Medici dynasty, their story refuses to settle into a finished chapter. The family's concealments, codes, and carefully guarded legacies continue to stir the imagination of scholars, historians, and even scientists. What makes the Medici so endlessly captivating is not only what they achieved but what they hid, and it is in that tension between revelation and secrecy that new discoveries still unfold. Far from being locked away in the past, the Medici remain a living puzzle, a set of intertwined clues that continue to reshape how we understand both them and the Renaissance itself. Modern research has brought tools that the Medici themselves could never have imagined. Advances in imaging technology now allow art historians to peer beneath the surface of paintings to detect underdrawings, alterations, or symbols that were invisible for centuries. In frescoes funded by the Medici, restorers have uncovered faint marks that may have served as hidden emblems, discrete signatures of their influence. In manuscripts once thought fully catalogued, ultraviolet light reveals marginal notes, sometimes scratched faintly or written in ink that had faded almost beyond sight. Each rediscovered line suggests that the official record is only part of the story, that layers of intent lie waiting under layers of beauty. Archaeological work in Florence has also revealed surprises. In the Medici chapels, where generations of the family rest, researchers have uncovered hidden chambers and inscriptions that hint at private rituals or symbolic programs not meant for public eyes. Bones, fabrics, and artifacts are now studied with forensic precision, raising questions about health, cause of death, and even the presence of toxins. Were some Medici heirs poisoned to shift succession? Did enemies leave their mark on the family's lineage in more physical ways than we once believed? Scientific inquiry makes it possible to ask these questions with evidence rather than rumor. Digital technology has turned the vast correspondence of the Renaissance into searchable databases. Thousands of letters, once scattered in archives, can now be read side by side. Patterns emerge, connections become clearer, and coded phrases reveal themselves to modern cryptographers. Where earlier historians struggled with faded ink and inconsistent handwriting, computers now analyze networks of communication, tracing who knew whom, who wrote when, and who concealed their meaning beneath layers of metaphor. It is as though the Medici's hidden network is being reconstructed, node by node, message by message, centuries after it dissolved. Yet even with these advances, the Medici mystery is far from solved. For every letter discovered, others are missing. For every chamber opened, others remain sealed. For every fresco examined, others still conceal pigments that time has darkened beyond recognition. The tantalizing possibility is that some of the most important secrets remain just beyond reach. What if a lost ledger of the Medici Bank were to surface, detailing transactions that linked them directly to events we thought unconnected? What if a chest of letters in cipher were found in a forgotten villa, explaining alliances or betrayals that shifted the balance of Europe? What if beneath layers of paint in a Botticelli masterpiece lies a symbol that changes our reading of Florence's history? The hunt continues, and it draws not only professional historians, but also amateur codebreakers, scientists, and curious travelers. Each discovery brings the Medici back into focus, but also complicates the picture. Rather than closing the book on them, new evidence often widens the questions. Were they aware of how fully they were reshaping Europe? Did they believe themselves benevolent, or did they know how ruthless their methods appeared? Did they consider their concealments acts of survival or of ambition? Each clue offers a piece of the puzzle, but the whole remains elusive, like a portrait that shifts every time the light changes. The reason this matters is not only academic curiosity. Understanding how the Medici worked in shadows offers a way of seeing power itself more clearly. They show us that what is visible is often only the surface, that generosity can disguise control, and that beauty can carry hidden designs. In studying their codes, their networks, and their symbols, we become better at reading the language of power in our own time. Modern politics, business, and culture are filled with performances, narratives, and gestures that may conceal as much as they reveal. The Medici are a reminder that to grasp how power functions, we must look beneath appearances, seek out the hidden corridors, and learn to recognize the coded signals that shape decisions. There is also something profoundly human in the pursuit of their secrets. To search for what they concealed is to participate in the same game of concealment and discovery that define their lives. The Medici crafted puzzles in art and architecture not only to guide their contemporaries, but also to control how future generations would remember them. By studying them today, we enter into dialogue with their intentions, sometimes confirming them, sometimes challenging them. In this sense, each reader, each researcher, and each curious observer becomes part of the unfolding story, playing a role in decoding the past. Our role in the code is not only to admire the brilliance of the Medici, but to question it. Their secrecy allowed them to survive, but it also distorted the truth of their time. By peeling back the layers, we can better understand both their achievements and their costs. We can recognize that the Renaissance was not simply a golden age, but a complex dance of light and shadow, generosity and manipulation, inspiration and control. And by recognizing this, we sharpen our awareness of how similar dynamics continue today. Power still works through networks, through images, through appearances. Leaders still rely on concealment, on half-truths, on performances carefully staged. Institutions still guard secrets, whether in locked archives or in encrypted servers. The Medici are not only a story of the past, but a guide to the present, showing us that the hidden hand of power is always there, waiting to be traced. The unfolding mystery of the Medici lies in this enduring relevance. Every discovery adds another layer, but the fascination remains because we sense that there will always be more to uncover. Florence still whispers with their presence. Its streets, palaces, and churches are filled with echoes of their choices, both celebrated and concealed. To walk there is to move through their theater, a stage that continues to speak centuries after the actors have vanished. And so the Medici remain what they always were, both visible and invisible, both patrons and power brokers, both benefactors and manipulators. Their secrecy was never fully pierced in their lifetime, and even now it resists final explanation. But perhaps that is their greatest achievement. They mastered not only the art of ruling, but the art of leaving mysteries that endure, ensuring that they are never forgotten, never reduced to simple categories, always compelling us to look deeper. To understand them is not to solve them, but to live with the tension they created, between art and ambition, between generosity and control, between what is seen and what is hidden. In that tension lies their true legacy, one that continues to unfold, one that makes the Medici not just figures of history, but companions in the ongoing search to understand power itself.